So real quick, I know all you guys have a pretty good sense of where things are at, but I did just want to give a high-level view of kind of where we're at in the industry today, just to lay the foundation for the discussion. Then I'll start the rapid-fire Q&A. So we touched on this a little bit in the general session today, but since 1995, beer's share of total alcoholic beverage has gone from over 60% in 1995 to just over 50%. A couple years ago in 2015 was the last time that I pulled that report. While wine and spirits have grown from about 27% and 11% respectively to over 32% and 17% of the market. So clearly wine and spirits are taking share from beer. We talk about it a lot when we come to these conferences, and the question always gets asked, what are we going to do about that? During that time, the industry has added nearly 5,000 more breweries, and the wholesaler and craft segment has grown to become more than 12% of all the beer sold in the U.S., or I should say the craft segment has. And the number of wholesalers has actually consolidated from about 3,500 down to 2,300. So a lot more breweries selling fewer amounts of beer to fewer wholesalers, while wine and spirits grabs market share from beer. And that's just something I found really interesting, all those dynamics playing together. Also, something that is top of mind for everyone, tap rooms have grown considerably. We all know the story there. Tap rooms sprouting up all over the place. I think the big two own over 30 tap rooms now, I believe, or retail outposts. That's AB and Miller Coors. SKUs are through the roof. 2.5 million barrels, or more than 2.5 million barrels, are going to flow through tap rooms this year. You have a consumer now that is no longer loyal to just one particular beverage. They surf between FMBs and cider and hard seltzers and beer and wine and spirits and everything else. So, and maybe marijuana as well. It is legal now here, so that is another factor to consider. And basically what that all adds up to is an increasingly more complex alcoholic beverage category and a whole ton of businesses trying to figure it out. So I'll, with that, pose the question, how do we figure it out, guys? What's happening out there, and where are we headed as a category? And I'll start with Simon.
Thanks, Sam. I think some of the challenges that are sitting out there, contrary to what a lot of people think, I think a lot of breweries get up in the morning trying to put themselves into the shoes of wholesalers and figure out how do you work within a wholesaler system. And I think if you just kind of suspend where we are as brewers for a moment and you kind of think about all the pressures that are on a wholesaler right now, I think they're quite considerable, and things are shifting. So on the one hand, you've got a massive complexity issue that has been created over the last 8 to 10 years, and wholesalers as a group are good, bad, and indifferent, I think, at dealing with that. Some of them have got it figured out. Some people have become very sophisticated at managing that complexity. Some of them are relatively small and focused, and it's not so much a factor for them. And then there's a group in the middle, and I kind of tend to view that group as the ones who are still trying to sell beer the same way, but without understanding how to deal with that complexity, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue for them. So complexity cost is one thing that I think, as we as brewers look at what's happening in the wholesale world, that's a big issue, and how you manage that and how you adapt to that, I think is going to determine how wholesalers are going to be over the next 10 years or so. So that's kind of number one. Number two for me is, in terms of thinking about some of the dynamics at the moment, we tend to, one thing that I think is really overlooked by a lot of people is, how do you talk to a 21-year-old these days? And we tend to think about legal drinking age, 21 and above, and a lot of us have been kind of, in the last few years, we've talked a lot about millennials and how you talk to millennials and the changing nature of that. Gen Z is coming. They're coming soon to a bar near you, and they really think differently. They interact with media very, very differently. Their whole value set is, as a group, is quite different. And I think we have to figure out, as brewers and brand developers, how to talk to 21-year-olds these days, because it's not the way that it was even for millennials. 25-year-olds think differently from this 21-year-old group, and it's changing very, very fast. I think that's a big issue sitting out there, which it's very difficult to get your arms around because it's changing so much. And so many of the paradigms, the way that we've developed brands, both in terms of the way we think about them, but also how you communicate, are getting chucked out the window. And then the final piece of the puzzle for me is thinking about how distribution is going to evolve over the course of the next 10 years or so. Real easy to see. Amazon, Whole Foods, duh. I mean, it's not brain surgery to see that that is going to have a big impact, and there are ripples already starting to occur throughout beer as people start to think about things like, well, if you've got a DC in your market as a wholesaler, but that DC is servicing outside and kind of shipping to consumers outside your footprint, then how do you deal with that? Is that good? You know, clearly there are implications there. So how we deal with the evolving distribution, I think, is going to be the third key thing for me. So pass over to...
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of different things to unpack there, and kind of kick it to Chuck to get the wholesaler's perspective on some of those challenges that you guys are seeing out there. Simon touched on, obviously, the future generation of drinkers, just the way the wholesaler landscape is evolving, and kind of what the future might hold. What are you seeing, and what are your thoughts on kind of where we're headed as a category?
I think beer is going to continue to grow. The crafts are going to continue to grow. And from a distributor perspective, I think one of the challenges for us from the outside is picking the right partners, picking the right suppliers that are right for our market or for the model of your distributorship. The other major challenges we've had over the past probably 5-10 years is how we've evolved as distributors. So it is much more costly to go to market as a distributor now because we have more brands. The brands we have are more complex, a lot more SKUs. So we've had to change sort of on the front side of sales, adding more people, adding more specialists, adding more training, a lot of things like that quite frankly, 10 years ago, we didn't have, or 15 years ago, you could go to market with fewer salesmen in a much different way, or salespeople. And then on the back end, so a lot of complexity on the back end, managing SKUs, managing freshness, managing your operational costs. I mean, we've had for us in particular, you look at our warehouse, we've had to add racking systems and certain IT systems to evolve, to stay up with the times. So it's constantly changing, but our goal is to be here, to keep growing, to be a distributor that people want to choose to be with. So we've had to make these changes.
Yeah. And Christian, you've got experience from years past in the beer industry. You've been sort of on the agency side for a bit. Now you're back with a small to mid-sized brewer. So you've kind of seen a lot of different things, been in a lot of different scenarios. As you look out into the future and kind of peer into your crystal ball, what do you think is sort of going on, and what are the biggest challenges for a company like Wachusett, and where are we going?
Yeah, I think I'll touch on your opening in terms of us losing share to spirits and wine. And for anyone who's ever worked with Diageo and you go to one of their national meetings, you think you have a great share of mind, and then you see how they work with spirits, and you realize you're just a little pimple in their big plan. And the amount of energy that they put towards marketing to females and to the different ethnic groups is light years ahead of beer. And we're all kind of fighting for the scraps on Longshanks tables, going after the same demo time and time again. And meanwhile, you look what spirit guys are doing, and they're so far ahead of us. And again, Diageo, I was there 7 years, and it's a machine in terms of their approach to that market. And that's, when you see their growth and how they're getting that new consumer, if you spent any time with them, you do not question it for a second. And I think, for us, we have to get more interesting and more diverse in our offerings. And, we're all going out, Constellation clearly is doing the best job of identifying some of these different targets and marketing their different brands to them correctly. And I think the majority of the other brands have to diversify in order to compete or to grow or gain share.
I mean, the two companies that you mentioned are obviously diversified in, multiple segments. So clearly they're able to leverage some of the insights that they're gaining from participating in those parts of the market to their advantage when it comes to beer, at least in the case of Constellation, it seems. But I think that at the end of the day, even if you're just a beer supplier, the most important thing that you can always turn to is the relationship between the brewer and the wholesaler, and that's really starting to evolve as well. So I want to touch on some of the issues that are sort of facing brewers and wholesalers as they look to work together to fight back against wine and spirits and take back some of that share, or not. Maybe it's just a situation where the train has kind of left the station and there's no turning back. But let's talk about sort of the first thing on my mind is really the evolution and modernization of the three-tier system. Can you talk about the ways, and I'll start with Simon, can you talk about the ways in which the three-tier system is evolving as it relates to e-commerce, which you touched on with Amazon, obviously franchise laws I want to get into, all the sort of proliferation of breweries, just the complexity now in the space, in the three-tier system, and how that impacts the brewer-wholesaler relationship.
I think no one gets up in the morning, I think, trying to suddenly overturn things that are working. I think the three-tier system fundamentally works. And the reason why I say that is no individual brewery can afford to distribute, service, build brands without a layer in the industry to help amplify what we're trying to accomplish. The economics don't work in the same way. So I start from a simple premise that the three-tier system is really, really helpful for developing beer. The question has always been for me as to how do you build brands in that context? And I think there was a time when beer was a lot simpler. Today it's much more complicated, both in terms of the retail structure, also in terms of the number of breweries that are out there, the complexity that wholesalers need to deal with as part of being the middle tier. And share of mind within that it's increasingly difficult. If you are not doing your job as a brewer, bringing really good things that wholesalers can get behind, that they can see as having potential, and they can focus on with their own organization as simple for them to work through the system, then I think we're failing wholesalers as partners. And I think all too often, particularly in the last 5-10 years, let's say, breweries have been guilty of bringing a whole bunch of stuff and saying, trust me, this is going to be the next best thing since sliced bread and we're all going to grow rich and famous. And that hasn't been the case. It's added a lot of gum and glue in the system that has made wholesalers' lives extremely difficult. So that's kind of point number one. The second point I would say is I think within the middle of everything that we're trying to accomplish together, and if you view a wholesaler partnership as you're wedded for life, most of our contracts with wholesalers are in perpetuity. You kind of hold hands and you jump together and you're in it for the rest of your lives. What that creates, hopefully, is a relationship where you are interdependent on each other. You have a responsibility within that to do the right things. And I think there used to be a time when there was a lot of conversation, maybe 10, 15 years ago, with wholesalers about the importance of building brands. Increasingly, that conversation is quieter. It's more about complexity and how you deal with it and how do you focus and give me fewer things. And I think somewhere in the middle of this, it's very important for wholesalers to think, as brewers, we give the wholesaler network our brands for life. And part of the ask in return for in perpetuity rights is help us to develop our brands. That's they're our babies. That's what we try to develop as brewing companies. So the wholesalers that are really, really good, in my mind, are those that have not lost touch with understanding of what the breweries are trying to do. They're trying to build brands, and those who are really, really good at it are those that still keep that front and center in their mind. So for me, it's about keeping true to what I think the three-tier system should represent.
And if they don't build brands, you just take them to court?
Sorry, second?
If they don't build brands, you just take them to court?
No. No one gets up in the morning saying, hello, I'd like to go to court, please. I mean, let's get real. Sometimes as you work this through, you're going to hit lumps and bumps. And some of that is where you feel that you need to be sustainable as a business over a long term. I'll give you an example. Pabst has 714 wholesalers in our network. Okay, it's a really, really big number, frankly. If I'm looking at that objectively, I say that's about 300 too many. So does that mean that we suddenly embark on a path of reducing the number of wholesalers? No, it doesn't. There are people out there who have built our brands over a number of years, and they deserve the support that we can give them in terms of working through that. So a lot of people talk the talk about, oh, I value the three-tier system, I value our wholesaler networks. I think it's what you do. And if you genuinely want to support it, you support a bigger network. Now, does it mean that economically over time, 700 wholesalers is sustainable for Pabst? I don't think it is. I mean, we're up against some very big competitors. There's a lot out there that we've got to do. The service model for being able to do that, it's just not economic over the next 20 years or so. So you spend time trying to make gradual, steady changes so that people don't lose out. But no one's getting up in the morning trying to go to court, Chris. It's not the way of the world.
Yeah. Chuck, what are your thoughts on some of the comments that Simon made about brand building and, maybe the lack thereof, possibly?
So, I mean, as a distributor, I, adamantly defend brand building by distributors. But look, a distributor's role is to brand build. We sit down, we sign up. To Simon's point, you are getting brands in perpetuity, and part of the deal is brand building. So I totally put that on the back of our company, other distributors, to go out and brand build. And with that being said, it has become more complex. I agree with Simon. There are a lot of conversations about the complexity, but the conversation we have is, let's focus on the right brands. Let's pick out of this portfolio. I mean, suppliers are coming in with 15, 20, 30 SKUs. Okay, let's pick the 4 that are probably doing 85% of the business and focus on that. And then you have another plan for the others, which seems to work a lot of the time too. And having open, candid conversations is, and I can speak for ourselves, is what we like to do as far as how we go to market, and I think what works really well.
But that's kind of running, focusing on 4 core products is something that runs a bit counter to the consumer movement right now, which is all about rotation, all about trial, all about new products. So how do you balance the two?
So I think you want to grow a focus of brands that are driving the business, and then you still have to concentrate on these other brands. But the reality is, if you want to grow a portfolio, probably growing 15 things at one time is going to be really difficult to do. So it's probably more realistic to sit down. I mean, maybe it's 6, maybe you can do 10 at one time if they're all hot. But I haven't seen a portfolio where you have 10 super hot brands that warrant focusing on all of them at that one time, and go to market. That being said, we still distribute all the other brands, and you're going to do the right thing and get them on the shelf and do all that. So I don't think it's counter to growing a business or growing a brand. It's about focusing the right way and having those conversations with suppliers, like Simon or whoever else it is.
Sure. Are there strategies within that that make more sense? So, for instance, shifting some of the responsibility of brand building on the lower volume SKUs to the brewer, while the wholesalers focus on, the core products, or, what are some of the strategies that you guys could come up with creatively together to, kind of strike that balance and find a perfect harmony?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think with all suppliers go to market a different way. I think the best ones support their brands in the business and have people in the market, and oftentimes the reps can help offset. So if you're focusing on some of the really hot brands and you have a seasonal or a one-off or different things like that, we do like to work with the suppliers that have the reps in the market and kind of figure out a plan where we can do one thing, they can do one thing, or we're both doing the same thing together to grow the brand. But absolutely, look, I think it's our responsibility to brand build and get the sales and build displays and put up point of sale. The better suppliers out there have people in the market that are also out there helping and assisting and calling on the top 30 accounts that are moving the needle. I think that's a great way to go to market.
That is quite an expensive undertaking for a small brewer, Christian.
Yes, it is.
And I know that you just kind of went on your sort of first road show, meeting with distributors, being in the gig with Wachusett for a few months now. And one of the things I think that you had said you learned was just the immense cost of having to support the brands in the marketplace that's been passed on to the brewer now. And maybe you could, help everyone kind of understand the economics behind it and help everyone understand kind of, where it makes sense, where it doesn't make sense, why it wouldn't make sense, and, what kind of an undertaking that is for a small brewer like Wachusett.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because growing up in the Boston beer model, I was with them for almost 8 years, and it was all about great people on the street, right? That's their reputation. And you go to any core market, they'll have a local street rep, they'll have an area manager, they'll have someone calling on on-premise chains, they'll have someone calling on off-premise local chains, never mind the national account chains. And it's really, I think, created a situation for other craft brewers that they just can't compete. And it's funny, when I did the road show, going around introducing myself to the wholesalers, or reintroducing myself, and the first thing is, we'd love someone in our market. And I was supposed, yes, I'll do that. And then doing the math, you're like, okay, well, you hire a street rep, $50,000, give them a car, benefits, insurance, all that. You're $100,000 before they've even started probably spending any money. And Simon and I were talking on a call before this, and add another, whatever you want to tack on, $20,000 to $40,000, what that actually ends up costing you additional to that. So even if you used $100,000, that means in every market you go put a rep in, every brewer has a different model, but let's just use that they have to represent 15,000 incremental cases in order for them to pay themselves. And then as a small brewer, you say, all right, if there's 15,000 cases available, why are we giving you the margin, and why aren't we just selling ourselves? And it's a real problem. And the problem isn't, to Chuck's point, and he said it really well, it's how they measure good suppliers. Because, again, that's going to move you up the ladder in terms of, Boston Beer always had a mantra, like share of mind, get the share of mind you deserve from the wholesaler based on revenue, not cases, was always Jim's point, revenue, and then share of heart. What you do above and beyond. Show up on Fridays, go make them breakfast, go deliver cases on the weekend to places you don't need help, and do all the things. And if you go now with this consolidation where in every market your Miller Coors guy can have Constellation, Heineken, Diageo, Boston Beer, and a couple other regional crafts, and they all have people in the market, well, how are the smaller regional crafts competing with that? They're not effectively. I mean, they can do well in their home markets, but to your point, you draw a circle around your core market, and then we talk about the adjacency markets to them. But to those other markets, the only model that works is you just ship them beer and hope for the best. And hope it doesn't ruin, obviously, quality, and ensuring the quality of product's always great. And that's not a good model, but a lot of craft brewers do it.
That's a lot of breakfast to eat, huh, Chuck?
It'd be nice. It's a lot of breakfast.
I never had Chuck's Market, so I never made breakfast.
But yeah, I mean, look, it's good to understand, Christian's perspective of it, and it is tough. But I would say, look, the reality is there's 5,000 craft breweries in the country. There's 82 breweries in New Jersey, so there's a lot of competition. So if you want to weed through the competition, I think on some level you have to have someone to help support the market. Look, we have suppliers that don't have people in the market, and that's okay. My conversation with them is, here's my suggestion. I think you should have someone in the market to support it. You're going to do that much better, and you should want a brand ambassador. And if you can't have someone, maybe the model's not right. Maybe you shouldn't be in the market. Maybe Christian's idea of staying focused on your area is right, and then slowly expand where you can support it.
Is that why Peerless has taken the approach that it has with regards to the suppliers that it works with? I mean, for craft, in large part, you work with more established, more regional suppliers that can really support the marketplace in the way that we're all talking about. And yeah, you have a few smaller craft brands, but really the focus is on some of the larger, more established players. Can you help us understand that strategy?
Yeah, I think it's sort of how we evolved over time, but we have 20 craft suppliers. That number feels good to us right now. We're always looking to add to see whoever could fit and be right, but I think we sort of evolved that way. Certainly big suppliers that can support the market has felt right to us. Look at our market, 8,000 CEs probably feels right. If you're not doing 8,000 CEs in our market, chances are after a year or two, the brands aren't going to move at retail. There's a reason you're going to be doing less than 8,000, and it's probably not right for the market is what we learned. But fortunately, I think we've picked a lot of the right people. We haven't had a lot of the tough discussions of having to cut suppliers and things like that because we haven't had a huge wagon tail. I think, the other dynamics of our market, we're in northern New Jersey. It's a little bit of a more, just a different kind of market. It's very multicultural. So, it's a very big import market. So while we may be a little bit shorter on the tail of craft, we have a lot of small import brands that seem to do well in sort of our niche market.
You talk about, you have to be able to do 8,000 CEs in order to, really find a place in your portfolio. Where are those 8,000 CEs coming from if you're taking on a new brand? Like, are those coming from your competitors? Is it coming from other brands that you might be carrying? Or is it, at what point can you actually, recapture some of the share from wine and spirits by adding a new brand?
Well, I'd like to think that every new brand that we bring in comes from a competitor. Certainly there's cannibalization of brands we have. I think it'd be foolish to think that every time we bring a new brand in, it couldn't cannibalize something else. And that being said, we do have brands that do less than 8,000 because we felt that competitively it made sense for us, or we really like the brewers or the brewery or whatever the story was. That's just sort of a number that's a starting point. But we do have brands that are smaller than 8,000. I don't think we bring in a new brand that's going to beat wine and spirits. I think that's a whole other animal that's probably bigger than us. I think we can have a part of doing some things at the local level, at the street level to try to affect that and be relevant and be part of the right festivals and samplings and things like that. But for us to bring a new brand in, we're not just going to beat wine and spirits. That's a little bit bigger than us, I think.
Listen a little bit to what Chuck said, because I think if as brewers you put yourself in the shoes of a wholesaler, there's a couple of things that Chuck said that I think are really important for us all. If you think about as a wholesaler, how do I take share from a competitor wholesaler down the road? If you're a brewer who's walking in the door and saying, I can help you to do that, job done, you're going to get share of mind straight out of the gate. So I think, for example, as we're thinking about innovation at Pabst for 2018, 19, 20, part of the way that we test that is to go to wholesalers and say, right, is this going to help you advance your agenda against your competitor down the road? Because I know that if I can push on that open door, then we're going to have massive wholesaler support for that. It's really important. So as a criteria, as a way of testing whether or not your innovation's any good, go talk to your local wholesaler and say, look, is this going to help you get market share from your competitor down the road? If the answer's no, go back, try harder. C+ must do better. That's kind of number one. In terms of the investment, I think it's very easy to look at a shifting margin pool. If you all get very theoretical about it, you can say, okay, there's a shift in the overall margin pool, the way that investment's happening in beer, that over time, wholesalers are pushing some of that, the need to invest in feet on the street back up the stream to the brewer. All gets very theoretical. I think the reality of what Chuck says is absolutely right, is that wholesalers tell you what will work. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years, and I think it's true in the way that we apply it at Pabst, is listen really, really hard to what your wholesaler is telling you works in New Jersey or Texas or California, because they're all different. But if you listen really hard and you actually do exactly what they tell you to do, it's amazing. It actually works. And this ain't brain surgery, guys. And I think sometimes as probably the larger you get as a company, you tend to forget that if you listen really hard to what a wholesaler is telling you to do, it's amazing the results that you can get, because you're pushing on an open door. And we test at Pabst an awful lot of times whether the programs that we are bringing are going to work within a wholesaler's individual system. Are we doing things that an individual wholesaler wants to do? Because if they want to do it, you're going to get 10 times the amplification that you would do if you're saying, hello, I'm really, really clever and I know better than you, and I've got this national program that I developed in Iceland or New York or somewhere, and I'm going to apply it to San Antonio because I know that it will work then. No, wrong. It's just no. Let's try again. So the point I'm making here is, listen to what Chuck's saying here, is if you are doing things that work in your wholesaler system and you listen attentively to that, you get much, much more powerful results than if we think we're enormously clever as brewers.
Well, I mean, that seems like the classic case of, they know their business better than you do. I mean, that's, I think, true of a lot of businesses, right? I'm sure people are always giving you guys suggestions on things you should create as brewers or things that you should do as wholesalers. And, at the end of the day, it's, you know your business better than the guy that's giving you advice most of the time. But one of the things you mentioned, Simon, is this idea, or this, you called it sort of the theoretical idea of a shifting margin pool, and some of the costs, going back upstream to the brewers, and that, I guess, sort of begs the question of, and we talked about, all of the investment on salespeople and feet on the street coming now from the craft brewers and even from the larger brewers as well. That sort of begs the question: do wholesalers deserve the same 30% margin that they typically take on these products if a lot of the investment is now coming from the brewers? And is there a discussion that needs to be had about that? So I'll toss that right back to you, Simon.
I mean, first thing is good luck if you're getting 30% margin. Great. Well done, guys. I mean, again, put yourself in the shoes of a wholesaler right now in US beer in the last 5 years. You've got margin compression up the wazoo. I mean, you've got pricing compression left, right, and center. And go back to what we were talking about earlier about the enemy's not other beer, guys, it's wine and spirit. My biggest issue is cheap vodka, because I think that is taking volume from beer more than we might think. And when I see a $5 bottle of vodka sitting out there, my heart bleeds, because that's eroding the margin pool completely. So you're getting pricing compression from the top. The cost structure of operating a wholesaler right now is ballooning. I mean, you've got complexity. Over the last 10 years, wholesalers have taken on a massive load of complexity. We're still trying to, as wholesalers, everyone's trying to make sure that they can service their capacity that they've invested in. They've built warehouses, they've built infrastructure. They've got to keep that moving. The pure economics of it aren't great right now. And then you've got 20 different people all trying to chip away at the margin in terms of, you've got to give me a greater and greater share of the investment. And I'm going to give you less and less. Good luck if you're getting 30% margin. Those days we're well different now. I think if you think about it as the majority of wholesalers in America are still long-term family-owned businesses. They're multi-generational businesses. Each generation is going to pass on a legacy and build something for the future generation to inherit. No one wants to screw that up. You don't want to be the person who hands on a boat that is less fit for sailing than you inherited. And so I think for a wholesaler right now, it's a very challenging time because you're getting squeezed. And come back to the point I made earlier, I think there are some who have adapted really fast. They're looking ahead and they're trying to adapt and optimize and make sure that they can operate in a way that is creatively efficient. And I would put Peerless into the example of a wholesaler that is very, very clever at selecting the brands that they want to work with. They are very, very good at optimizing their routing in terms of the way that operates to get their cost base sorted out. There are others who are just not that good at that stuff, and they're still trying to work with a very cumbersome operation in that sense, and they're just hoovering up brands because I don't want to lose them to someone else. Okay. The clever wholesalers are the ones who are ballsy in the sense of saying, I'm not going to take that brand or that brand or that brand. I'm going to take this one for these reasons because I believe it's going to be, and I can develop that for the very, very long term. So, I mean,
so it's all about being deliberate in a sense.
Very deliberate, yeah.
And Chuck, a lot of what you guys do is very deliberate. Now, I'm curious to hear from all of you on, where franchise law reform fits into this entire discussion. I think, Simon, you mentioned no one wants to pass along a boat that's unfit for sailing to the next generation, and perhaps franchise law reform is one of the things that could I guess blow the boat in a different direction, or put that boat up against some different headwinds at least. So where do you guys stand on this issue of franchise law reform, particularly what we're seeing in Massachusetts? And what do you think is sort of the best path forward? Should there be some kind of solution out of all this? And I know it's state by state. It's really tough to paint it with a broad brush, but just curious for your thoughts on how that will play into the continued evolution of the segment. And I'll start with Christian, actually.
I support the Massachusetts Brewer Guild. That's all I can say.
Of course you do.
No, listen, there's a lot of smart people in all these states and all these rooms, and they're doing what they think is best for their business. And this is one of those classic meeting bingo games where we may not agree, but we need to align. And, there are some, I used to love it when someone from Diageo or Heineken came over from headquarters and they tell us, what we should do. And I'm like, great, that works in 3 states. What about, the other? Well, how about this? Well, that's 4 more states that's legal in. And every state's got, we know different rules, different regulations. New Jersey, Chuck will talk about, was one of the early ones to carve out a craft legislation to make it easier. And, Simon kind of was alluding to Jim's quote about, it's easier to get out of a bad marriage than it is a bad wholesaler relationship. And there's got to be flexibility on both sides. And, it's obviously not easy, and there's a lot of self-interest and history at work. I think as playing the role of small craft brewer, again, it's hard, and you have a hard time sometimes when you're with these multi-portfolio wholesalers saying, am I really that crucial to your business? Are you closing doors if we go somewhere else right now? And they obviously don't want to see brands leave. They'll either trade you or not. But you're in outside that core market analogy I was given, like no one's losing their job if we go somewhere else. But for us, it could be a game changer for our business to really grow it. And all the things that are going on with the tap rooms and what our business, Simon was just talking about the wholesaler business model. What's the brewery business model, and what's that based on? Are you contract brewing to subsidize your income? Are you opening up a tap room because, I hate to say it, in some of the math that we do, when that you brew some limited release kegs. I could sell it to a wholesaler for $100, or I could pour it and make $750. And that $750 could go to me adding more salespeople. We just did an event 2 weeks ago, and I did the math. The amount of beer we sold at the event is equivalent to 2.5 trailers of beer shipped to a wholesaler, net. And, that can help us. We've bought $3 million worth of equipment in the last 2 years to keep up with our growth and give our wholesalers 16-ounce cans and, 6-pack cartons and all the investments that we need to do to stay current. But we have to be able to come up with alternative revenue streams in order to deliver that type of growth or that type of progress that they're demanding and asking you for. And then give them a $100,000 person to go sell it in the market, right? So, it's also knowing, for the craft guys, knowing what their revenue model is and helping them or supporting them. There's, with the tap room, obviously we're super concerned because we've never had one. And, the last 90 days before we opened, our on-premise trend in our local market was down 5%. The last 90 days since we opened, it's plus 5%. So, while we're very conscious of it,
effect, yeah.
Yeah, let's be honest, we're not, again, sacrificing jobs or our business in the marketplace. So, again, it's all the, every craft brewery is different, every state's different. I think it's just about figuring out what the commonalities are, and hopefully everyone, gets some part of what they want out of the deal.
Sure. You as an individual brewer might not be causing a job to be lost, or volume that would have otherwise passed through the 3-tier system. That's going to you now as you sell direct, and at some point, with enough of the single Wachusett type companies embarking on these initiatives, you get to 5, 10, 20, 100 in a market, that will have an impact. And it does get to the point where probably retailers are upset, wholesalers are certainly upset, and that's a problem. And it all does sort of eventually tie back into the issue of franchise laws. And wanted to talk with you, Chuck, and get your thoughts on it. Find out, what the situation is in New Jersey, why you think that is a good system and something that works, and just maybe elaborate on kind of how it functions in your market.
Yeah, so in New Jersey, we rewrote the franchise laws in 2010, and I think the key to it, it was sort of an open model. Everyone had skin in the game. The distributors, the brewers, and we came to a very fair and equitable place, which I think everyone's very comfortable with. And on some levels, maybe it's a model for the rest of the country. Without going into, every detail of it, seems that distributors are very comfortable with it. Suppliers seem comfortable with it. But the key was kind of the open forum, and brought us there where we are today.
Certainly something to keep in mind, and certainly something to watch, especially in Massachusetts. We could have a whole, I feel like a full day on this stuff.
There's a point though, Chris. I think that there's an awful lot of talk about franchise law from the brewer-wholesaler dynamic. We're not going to, it's retail that is going to determine how the franchise law develops, in my mind. There are so many bigger other pressures from retail. Go back to what I said earlier, Amazon delivering.
Sure.
That kind of stuff, those are much bigger issues for us to focus on. If, again, we're probably guilty of just kind of focusing on our own little backyard a little bit in terms of thinking, again, about brewer, wholesaler, franchise law issues. The elephant in the room for beer is not other beer, it's wine and spirits. The elephant in the room for me for franchise law is not brewers and wholesalers, it's what's going to happen to retail.
I think that's a good point. Let's jump right in and talk about where you sort of see the future of e-commerce and some of these digital platforms going, like Drizzly. Simon, you mentioned sort of Gen Z. I think the first 21-year-old, the first person from that demographic turns 21 next year. So it's 2018. That consumer is somebody that everybody will be selling to. What impact do you think e-commerce in general will have on the beer category? It's obviously something that is still a big question mark. How are you guys preparing for it? And, you know, are there any sort of creative solutions or strategies that, you know, all three of you guys have maybe started discussing as you look out into the future of, you know, the way beer could be sold? And I'll start with Christian, actually.
I mean, it's coming. Like, don't keep your head in the sand. I think, I mean, the one thing is that in the out-bev space, you know, beer likely is the last to fall, just by weight and bulk and cost. It doesn't nearly make as much sense as premium spirits and wine. But, you know, clearly the Whole Foods acquisition to give them physical space is a shot across the bow. And, you know, I talked to one wholesaler who jokingly said, great, I'm going to have one point one call point and I'm done. And then they'll take it from there. And, you know, for those of you who have ever worked in New York and dealt with the Home D channel and what that's all about, you know, that's not the model we want to see. I mean, we want to have more control on our brand and obviously how it's placed on the shelf and how it's presented to consumers. You know, but, you know, it's coming.
Chuck, do you guys have an Amazon distribution center in your market, and have you thought about, you know, kind of what you guys might do as a wholesaler to work with them?
Yeah, I mean, we think about it a lot. I think they're coming. I think there's going to be, you know, from what we can tell, there's going to be 4. And as a distributor right now, you look at it, like, we can't control Amazon. As far as e-commerce and social media stuff, you know, we're doing everything we can as far as communication. But if you're the distributor that has Amazon in the market, you're probably, you know, at this point in a pretty good place if that's how it plays out, that it's from the distributor to Amazon to the market. And if you're not, then you're a little bit worried because, you know, I heard a stat that maybe 4% of any brewery sales could go through an Amazon to the market. So it's a scary proposition. That is something that keeps me up at night. I think would keep most distributors up at night moving forward. But we do see, I mean, you know, I live in New Jersey, but in New York, there's Fresh Direct, which is a big deal in some cities, and you see the amount of beer going through them. So yeah, I mean, 100%. It's here. It's clearly here and moving forward. To what extent? I don't know.
How big do you see e-commerce becoming, Simon? I mean, clearly that's...
By the end of 2018 or longer?
2018 and beyond. I mean, it's clearly
I think
the wave of the future.
If you look at what's happening in some of the Amazon test market, and I don't want to hyper-obsess about Amazon because Chuck's right, there are others, but just as an example, top 10 in Raleigh, North Carolina, top 10 customer within 12 months. I mean, that to me that's what I was told. That to me says scale. I think to Christian's point, if you think about how Gen Z and even 25-year-olds, if you're living in Brooklyn or LA or just Kansas City, for goodness sake, just the ease and the convenience of having your heavy bottles of beer delivered to you. Oh, and by the way, you're having a party and you want it within an hour. Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll have it brought into you on a drone. Whenever that happens. But just the basic convenience of not having to go to the supermarket and carry this heavy stuff down, and if you live in an apartment, you know, take it upstairs and so on. It's a no-brainer. It's going to happen. So at least to me, I think one should assume that it's going to be at least 10% in key markets, if it's not already, by the end of 2018. I think Christian's right. It's coming. You know, get over it. Don't try and fight it. You've got to work within it.
Have you guys perhaps figured out how to work within it yet?
I think, I mean, the answer to the question is I don't think anyone has, and truthfully, and I don't think some of these delivery retailers have actually really themselves thought how they are going to do this for the next 5 years or so. They clearly have a good operating model and they know what they're doing, but some of the nuances of how you're actually successful in it are a different question. The short answer is I think we can all build infrastructure in our companies to be able to deal it. You have a sales team who's going to call on this. You have to manage your assortment and pay attention to what you're putting into these retailers way more diligently. I think some of the things that are going to be issues for us are you can't actually go up to someone and say, please try this, and taste this beer because it's really, really good. And by the way, we're using Sass hops and tell them a story and sell and educate in the same way. We've got to find a completely new model that allows us to educate and sell and get people engaged with our brands rather than having someone do that in store in a bar. So to me, that's job number one. We've got to think through real fast how we're going to adapt our marketing towards that kind of challenge.
So I know we've only got a few more minutes here before we wrap up and let people go hit the casino floor or go to dinner or do what they do. I did want to kind of leave it on a positive note and then open up the opportunity for folks in the audience to ask questions. But for my final question, what are you guys excited about as you look out into the future? I mean, clearly there've been plenty of gray skies, doom and gloom. Beer sales down. I started this whole thing off about wine and spirits, and in general, I mean, it just seems like the business has become a lot more challenging, a lot more complex. A lot of the excitement that seemed like it once was there is, really kind of softened and quieted. So, is there something that excites you about, moving forward into the future with things like e-commerce, with some of the new brands that are being created? I mean, it can be anything. It can be an innovation that you're particularly excited about. What keeps you getting out of bed in the morning, and what keeps this thing fun and exciting and positive for you guys? And I'll start with Christian, and we'll go down the line.
Yeah, this is a great business. Like this business, go talk to your friends and say, what do you do? And you tell them what they do, and you're like, everyone would trade spots with you in a heartbeat. I was at Diageo, and I had a co-manager of Smirnoff, and she left because Rekha Ben-Kizar threw a little more money in title. And she calls me 2 months in, she's like, do you know how unexciting it is to be the national marketing director of Swiffer? Going to another Swiffer launch event, how exciting that is. We did a tour with Madonna 6 months ago, and now she's doing Swiffer launch events. And, I hate the headline stuff. I mean, tell Trillium or Maine Beer Company or the people standing 3 hours to be allowed to buy a 4-pack of Treehouse beer that, craft beer is flat and slowed down. Yes, the macro guys are driving the overall trend, and they're certainly in having some rough waters right now, but there's a lot of excitement and energy in the space. You just, it's not, this is no longer, rising tides are lifting all boats. It's the guys that are putting out high quality stuff, know what they're doing, identifying the opportunities. There's a lot of excitement going on, and the macro headlines just drive me crazy because it's not the reality of what's really happening underneath. And I think, for us, both in the craft beer space as well as we play in the RTD space, it's exciting that, you can continually innovate, create, and consumers will respond. So ignore the headlines and, get down to what's really going on. There's a lot of great things still happening, and, we're excited about that.
I mean, you can read Brewbound. The headlines are good there. Don't ignore the headlines completely, please, or we can't keep doing this.
Sorry.
I will say that I saw some data actually while I was out at the GABF. So Nielsen has craft up 2%, but if you pull out, I believe, Blue Moon, Shock Top, and Sam from their set, craft is actually up like over 15%. So to your point, if you pull out some of the larger brands that might be dragging things down, you get a different picture. And of course, it's all about the cut or the slice that you take of the data. Chuck, what are you excited about?
I'll echo a lot of Christian's comments. Look, it's the beer business. There's great people in this business. This is a great convention. I mean, other businesses aren't like this, where you get these kind of people and great things like that. So that excites me. I mean, it's a lot of fun. The other thing that excites me and keeps me optimistic, the headlines are not great right now. There's some headwinds, but as a distributor, we rely on the breweries to stay innovative and exciting, and they're doing that. I mean, you look at the 5,000 craft breweries, you look at the major breweries out there. People they're thinking, they're doing some exciting things, and I believe in this business. Maybe there's some headwinds right now, but we'll work through it. It'll get through, and again, just the excitement is on what's going on at that brewery level moving forward.
Well, you got Simon Thorpe drinking Pabst, so I think anything is possible. Simon, what excites you?
I don't want this to sound self-serving, but I'm sure someone will accuse me of, because we seem to get rocks thrown at us all day long and twice on Sundays at the moment. But my view is real simple. I am really, really excited about Pabst, and some of you who've known me over the years may kind of look at that and go, well, why? But I think that and I'm with Christian on one really important thing. The headlines are bullshit for me. There's so much good going on inside Pabst. I really don't give a toss about some of the headlines and the rocks that are being thrown, because I know what's going on inside the company. We've got brands that I think are just perfectly positioned to surf this beautiful wave that's out there between craft and mainstream. They're uber cool, they're approachable. I mean, there's a portfolio there that is remarkable. If you dig into the numbers, Christian's point again, I mean, the headlines are great. They capture headlines and they sell newspapers. When you look at the fundamentals of a business, be it a brewery or a wholesaler or whatever, you can really see what's going on. And to me, if I look at the innovation, just some fantastic brand building activity that's going on in Pabst right now, I'm not at all worried about competition in the slightest. It doesn't faze me anywhere. I know what's going on, and the most important thing for me is I look at the passion and the culture that we've got at Pabst, and I think I admire a lot of craft breweries for the culture and the passion and the zest for beer that they've been able to bring, because I don't ever want us to be corporate. It's the first time I've worn a jacket in a year, by the way, guys. It still fits. But there's a culture and a passion about beer which I think if we lose that, doesn't matter whether you're a wholesaler or a brewer, you lose that at your peril. And I think craft is something that has really reinvigorated that. And for me at Pabst, that's what I'm most excited about.
Awesome. Do we have any questions out there? This is your one and only opportunity to ask them questions before a live audience streaming across the world. So if there are any questions, Justin in the back can float around a mic. If not, we can go enjoy some more tall boys, and maybe I'll see some of you guys at the roulette wheel.
Well, you kind of started bringing it in. You started bringing in the tap room issue, and this is a pretty hot topic around. And at what point does your tap room? I've been a very big supporter of breweries being allowed to have tap rooms at their brewing facility. At what point do those releases and do saving all the gems for yourself start hollowing out your brand and give you a lack of legs in the thing, a lack of tap handles out in the marketplace? I'm a retailer. Some of you may have been drinking at my place last week. And anyway, at what point do you start, jeopardizing the long term of your brewery?
Yeah, great question. And we went into it eyes wide open and being very open and honest. And we have a great wholesaler partner in that territory that we talked with. We went around to retail. We actually bought a food truck and gave the food business to the local food retailer to run. And he's seen his business grow because we're bringing more people into the area. And I think, as a rehabilitated marketer, the best thing we could do is create a brand experience for people to come absorb the brand, learn what we're all about, and then go try to export that. We couldn't do that. We've been a brewer since 1994. All right, this is the first year we had a tap room. So it was before, it was like Willy Wonka. You knew there was beer being brewed in there, but you couldn't go see it, touch it, smell it. And so we've been finally able to open the doors. And again, we track the business on a weekly level. And it's with pride I say, we basically turned around our on-premise trend by 10 points since we've opened. And that's a great story with our partners. That's a great story to talk to the retailers in town. I agree we've had that conversation about, well, we should just pour those kegs here. We need to create some destination beers, but we also have to make them available. And we haven't figured that one out yet. I think we got to figure out how do we get people to return, but should we also be able to offer everything to the local market so that they don't feel slighted? And again, if this makes us a better supplier because we are able to buy new equipment, we are able to put people on the street because we have a different revenue model, then hopefully that ultimately makes us a better partner to both retailers and and our distributor.
Simon, tap rooms aren't something that Pabst has explored fully. You guys have, one sort of real outpost. Why hasn't it been more of a focus for Pabst?
Not by design. I mean, I'll be honest, there's a bigger issue here, and I mean, for me, the elephant in the room here is, as brewers, what we're trying to do is to build brands, and Christian makes this great point, it's about creating the engagement with your brand that causes people to get excited about it and so on. And I think as brand owners, that's what we're trying to do. So for me, the primary purpose of having a tap room is not to make more money. It's to build awareness of your brand and educate people and get them to want to go down their supermarket down the road and buy it. The economics of a small craft brewery are real simple. If you're trying to get up and running, you're not going to make much money off the first 100 kegs of beer that you make. You can actually get your business up and running if you own a tap room and it can work. That's why there's so many tap rooms. It's guys trying to get a foothold in the market and make that work. For Pabst, it's real simple. I think that as we've got this fantastic portfolio of local brands that is just breathing just a gentle bit of warm air into them, and they've got so much latent equity underneath them at a local level. That's why Rainier's doing well, why Lone Star's doing well, why Stroh's is doing so well in Detroit. Can we build a brewery tap room to do that? Yeah, for sure we could do that. I think we look to be really thoughtful about how we do that to create a flagship in those local areas. And maybe it's by partnering with someone who already exists. Maybe it's by building a brew pub. I'll be honest, I don't know the solution to all of that. But all I know is that if I'm a startup craft brewer trying to make money and get up, I've got my MBA and I know all about beer, and I'm trying to launch something, owning a tap room is the surest economic solution for me to go and actually make a business out of nothing.
Well said. Well, I think there might be one more question up here and maybe back there as well. Going over here to Paul, I believe, maybe Justin. Did you have a question, Paul? No? Okay. Up here in the front then.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for sitting down tonight. Appreciate it. I want to hit back on the three-tier system and why it's important. I understand that, I'll never argue the fact that we don't need it because we do. But I do, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room probably feel the same way too, every now and again. But how can we as a community make it more of a partnership and not so one-sided I'm not going to say from a power standpoint, but there's, you mentioned earlier, you're in this for life. I know at Blake's Hard Cider, we, set yearly goals with each of our wholesalers, and, it's, if they don't hit the wholesaler, if they don't hit the goal, it's, okay, well, on to the next year, right? But there's never any repercussions if I don't want to sound bad that way, but there's nothing we can do to make their performance better to a point, if you get my drift. So how can you make it an actual quote unquote more of a partnership as opposed to kind of just being stuck sometimes?
Yeah.
I think the way that you frame that up is exactly the answer to the question. I think we all have, as brewers, we have to understand what our wholesalers' goals are, not ours. So very few people, I think, truly put themselves into the shoes of a wholesaler, founder, owner, principal, and say, what are you trying to achieve with your business this year, and how can I help? We all walk in the door, and we've got 30-page ABP decks. They're really good. They're shiny. And we know they're right because we've thought it through brilliantly. But what we haven't done is to figure out how does this serve the long-term goals and the short-term goals of Jerry Sheehan or Dominic Origlio or Chris Stefanci. Because if we put ourselves into their shoes and say, how do we serve your goals better? Damn, it's amazing how much easier your ABP flows. And so to me, I think the answer is in the question. We have to stop thinking about it as much in terms of we want to get this through a wholesaler and think more about how do we glide through and deliver on the wholesaler's expectations, because if we do that, it's a beautiful thing.
Final question, I'll kick it to Chuck. What are the qualities of your best partnerships, and which relationships do you have with brewers that feel more, I guess, transactional in nature?
So I think the best partnerships are with the suppliers that you feel really comfortable having that candid conversation with. I mean, you should be able to go into a distributor, let them know how you feel, and look, as a distributor, I would hope you wouldn't be stuck somewhere. That, I think the other thing is, the contracts you sign with certain people, and make sure when you go into a relationship, you're setting the expectations, just to kind of go back with that. But number one, I think the suppliers that I really value, you can have that candid conversation with, you can have that tough conversation with, and sort of move forward and figure out how to do the next thing. The other thing is, we go to market, those are generally the people that you have, as you go into annual business plans, have clear and organized goals, and you both agree, and then ideally we want to hit them. Our go to market is, if we sign up, we have really tough conversations at our annual business plan meetings, because coming out of our annual business plan meeting, we say, if we agree to it, we're going to go hit it. And look, if there's a bump in the road, we're going to have to address that throughout the year. But it's on us. We sign up for it. That's our reputational capital with that distributor, with that supplier, and anyone else who may come next. So that's really important to us. And then again, I said it before, but it seems like the ones that are really good in the market do support the brands. And I don't want to make it sound like it's absolutely necessary, but look, the ones that are really successful have at least a body in the market. It does help your brand to move forward. And I think if you can't support that, maybe it's not the right model to go there yet.
All right. Well, some great comments from everyone. Thank you guys for joining me. I appreciate it. I know we're going to get the boot from this room here in a few minutes. So thank you all for attending our final Brew Talks of the year, and thank you guys for speaking. Thank you to the Brewbound crew for getting everything set up, and to our sponsors and the NBWA, Vicinity Brew and Pabst. Cheers. Let's go have a beer.
Cheers. Thanks.